And okay, hi everybody. Welcome to part 4 of the Liberation series.
How long?
How do we liberate ourselves? Well, we started off the series by discussing what does freedom mean in the first place. The Torah has different versions of what this word freedom is. Is it chofesh? Is it dror? Is it zman cherutenu from the word charut from the Ten Commandments? And each of those nuances had different opinions of what really freedom is about. Is it personal freedom? Is it national freedom? Etc., etc. We also discussed things like how to develop freedom. And we discussed firstly how to be free with regards to our faith. And we shouldn't be blaming God. We shouldn't be blaming ourselves. We should really try and explore how we can be free from whatever tries to enslave us, even with regards to our own belief systems. And the last class we dealt with was just different methods of developing freedom from all different rabbis like Rabbi Nachman of Breslov and Rabbi Heschel and Rabbi Soloveitchik, just different nuances of how to break loose. Is it the mind that we're fighting? Is it other people's expectations from us? Is it our own expectations that we're slaves to? Is it external? Is it internal? All those types of things. Now we've arrived at the final destination, which is Passover. Now, when I say the final destination, I like to think of it as it's difficult to always feel free. One should always be cognizant that we have the pursuit of happiness and liberty, and I can't remember what else Thomas Jefferson said, but we should always be pursuing those things and have them at the forefront of our mind, but people don't. And you can't always focus on self-refinement. You have to work, you have to have a family, you have to do the things that you have chosen to do. So it's difficult to constantly maintain that that rigorous schedule of trying to perfect yourself. And it seems that the Torah was trying to tell us that at least once a year, yes, every year, of course, like Rabbi Nachman said, in every generation, in every era, every day, there is an exodus out of Egypt. But once a year, we try to focus on the theme that it will last us for the next couple of months and hopefully until the next Passover, so that that's in our mind, that we've actually made a conscious awareness decision to try and perfect. And that's what we're trying to do. So that's what I mean that Passover is the final destination. It's not the final, it's the beginning, but it's really a culmination of putting so much effort into trying to understand what freedom is. And then on Passover, you get to actually enjoy that freedom. The rabbis came up with this idea called the Seder. Now, who exactly invented it is unclear. It's very ambiguous who made the Seder. I know that the author of the Haggadah, who is anonymous, it's an editor that we don't know who it was, but he collected different ideas before him. And again, I'm assuming it's a he, it could be a she, I don't know. But the person who authored the Haggadah, who quoted Rav and Shmuel from the Talmud and Raman Gamliel and Rabbi Akiva and whoever else he's quoting, he was quoting different opinions of how to celebrate the coming out of Egypt, to view it as if you left from slavery and became free. And that's why it's so long. And that's why in the beginning of the Haggadah, it will say, whoever increases telling the story, it is considered praiseworthy. Because there is no end to trying to feel free and be free. And really, it's a lifelong experience. The Seder has, I would say, one major focus, and the one major focus is to try and teach the next generation about freedom. It's not enough to just enjoy it on your own. You have to impart it to others. Now, that's assuming that there are others. It's not always a good assumption. Why? Because this year in the pandemic times, a lot of people are alone. So there already, you have to view it that you're coming out of Egypt, even if you're on your own. Now imagine leaving Egypt on your own. It's not exactly the experience that I envision in my mind when the Jewish people left Egypt, a couple of million people strong. But still, there is some personal experience of getting rid of your bondage. Other people choose not to have children or can't have children, or already their children have left their homes. So that situation is also very, very internal and very, very individual. And the halacha says you still have to sing Manishtana to yourself, even when there are no children, even when there's no one answering the questions. You have to ask the questions yourself, as if force yourself to get into that mindset. So that's why it's not so obvious, that it's just created for the kids. But yes, I would say that the main mitzvah that the rabbis focused on is "V'higadatah levincha bayomahu," and you shall teach your children on that day, saying, God took me out of the land of Egypt. So yes, we do try to impart freedom, and it's not such an easy thing to teach children about freedom at the Seder. I was listening to a whole lecture by a rabbi on YouTube who was just he wasn't giving Torah over, he was just giving practical advice that, feed the kids on just before the Seder so that they're not so hungry, and make sure that they've been prompted that, yes, it's going to be a long night and they have to prepare and they have to look forward, because otherwise they're going to bounce off the walls. So it does require a lot of effort to do it in the way that the rabbis entailed. But you don't bite on a bone too big that you can chew. Don't try and do the whole thing if people are not going to enjoy it. The whole purpose of the Seder is to feel free and look forward to it the next year. So I advise everybody, if you're doing it on your own, do it as long as you wish and as long as you feel that you're enjoying it and feeling free. Don't push yourself to do things, because then you're making yourself into a slave, which is exactly what you're not meant to be doing. So, the rabbis advised you to do the Seder as much as you can, but at the same time, don't force people to do things that they don't want to do, because they'll just regret it and they won't want to come back to your Seder or be involved. And likewise, don't force yourself either. You know where's your comfort zone. You're the king and the queen on this particular evening. This particular Seder is a little bit different to normal Seders because Passover falls out on Saturday night. There are a few little differences that happens. One of them is the fast of the firstborn is on Thursday, because we don't fast on Shabbat in general. Why don't we do it on Friday? In general, we don't want to, make sure that the people don't prepare for Shabbat because they're fasting, or that it will affect Shabbat in any particular way. So they bring it all the way through over to Thursday. And, when I think about the fast of the firstborn, it doesn't apply to me. But it's amazing how the rabbis actually assumed that firstborn sons of Israel should really be sensitive to the idea that, there were people like them getting killed in Egypt, and you should be sensitive enough to that. And not only that, but really maybe they were deserving of death as well, and God spared them for some reason. It's unbelievable to get into the rabbinic mindset of, the second century or whatever it was, that they literally made a fast day for future generations for being saved from something that happened thousands of years ago. Why? Why are they fasting? Yes, fasting is healthy, of course it is, but they really must have thought that it was a miracle that the firstborn of the Jewish people was saved, because they easily could have been killed as well in that plague. So it's an unbelievable, how serious they take that fast. The fast itself is not that serious, but how serious they take that the Jewish people got saved. Okay, so that happens on Thursday. Then Thursday night, we'll do the searching of the chametz with the blessing, and you'll annul all your chametz. And then the next morning is when you will be burning all your chametz. Technically speaking, should be ready for Passover, almost 48 hours before the Passover even begins, because you're not allowed to burn on Shabbat. So therefore, you're doing it on Friday. Also, preparation for the Seder should happen on Friday. You're not allowed to cook on Shabbat. So you're not allowed to roast the shank bone. You're not allowed to roast the egg. You're not allowed to cook anything on Shabbat. So any cooking that's happening should be done on Friday for Saturday night. Technically speaking, you're allowed to cook on Saturday night, but you're involved in a Seder. So how can you go into the Seder and cook at the same time? So that's why you should be cooking on Friday for Saturday night. Okay, now let's go through Saturday night arrives. So you're lighting candles from a pre-existing flame, and you are saying the blessings over the Yom Tov candles. And now you are starting the Seder as soon as night begins. What does that look like? Well, the rabbis had, I think it's like a 10-step process, maybe a little bit more. Starts off with Kiddush. Happens to be a little bit different this particular year because there's Havdalah as well. So you're going to say Kiddush, there's going to be Havdalah as part of that Kiddush, and then you're going to say the Shehecheyanu blessing after that, and you drink the first cup of wine. We know that there are 4 cups of wine that you drink on the Seder. We always lean to the left when we drink. I know that most people just go like this. I was always taught that you lean backwards like this, as if you're on one of those Roman couches and they're feeding you the grapes. You know, as much as you can lean, why are you leaning to the left and not the right? There's an assumption that the trachea and the windpipe, the trachea is the windpipe, so sorry, the esophagus and the trachea, or the food pipe and the windpipe are next to each other, and the trachea of the windpipe is on the right. So if you lean to the right, there's a chance that the food might go into the windpipe. Now, I once read a whole article about this. It's very, very difficult for food to go in the wrong pipe, but it is possible. They have found Smarties and M&Ms in lungs of little children, okay? They have. So yes, food can go the wrong way, even though it's very uncommon. So when you're leaning, you should be thinking that you are a king or a queen. There were 4 expressions, I think it's in chapter 6 of Exodus, that the Torah uses of God taking us out of Egypt. You know, one is God redeemed us and took us, and God saved us, and it's another one, God brought us, and those ones are all different elements of getting out of your slavery, and lots of rabbis have embellished that. I'm not going to embellish that now because I don't have the time, but that is the first cup of wine. Now, I should mention at this stage what is on the table. So whoever hasn't had a Seder, I'm sure most of you have, but just in case anyone's listening to this who hasn't, there's something called a Seder plate. It doesn't have to be a bought Seder plate. It just could be a plastic plate, but you're putting, 5 things on it. That is a bone, which normally could be a roasted bone of any type of bone. Some people use chicken bone. I saw that online for vegetarians. Some people use a beet. Okay, whatever it's going to be, you're going to use some type of bone-looking thing. And the reason you're doing that is that represents the Paschal lamb, which we don't have anymore, but the Passover offering specifically for Passover is represented by that bone or that beet or whatever you're using. Then we have the charoset. The charoset is, again, it's in place of the mortar. When Moses told Pharaoh, let my people go, Moses, the first stage in Egypt, Pharaoh said, oh, really? You're going to take my people out? Not only am I going to work them hard, but I'm going to work them double hard. Now they have to build as much as they did before, as well as make their own cement. Before I was providing them with cement. So the cement is represented by the charoset, and the charoset is also somewhat representative of the Paschal lamb. We'll see that when it comes to the Hillel sandwich. Then we have the bitter herb, normally horseradish or romaine lettuce, and that is a mitzvah from the Torah to eat bitter herb to remind us of the slavery. There is also the karpas, which is normally parsley, and I'll talk about that in a few moments as well. And the last one is an egg. Now, why do we have an egg on the Seder plate? This is not so clear. It's not from the Torah that we should eat egg. You don't have to eat egg on Passover at all. The Ashkenazi custom is to eat egg in salt water as part of the meal. You don't have to eat egg at all. Why do we have an egg on the salt? Why do we have an egg at the Seder plate? Various traditions out there. The one that I thought is probably the most in tune with what I think the truth is that an egg is a symbolism of mourning. It's round, it represents the cycle of life. We often give eggs to mourners when they lose a relative. And we are representing that we are missing the temple. We can't fulfill Passover completely because we don't have all the particular sacrifices. In particular, some rabbis say it represents the second offering that was offered in the temple. The first one was the shank bone, which is representative of the Paschal lamb. The second one is the Korban Chagigah, the regular festival offering, which is a rejoicing offering that is offered in Jerusalem. So maybe the egg represents that. Okay, so you've got your Seder plates on the table. You've got your 3 matzahs, one on top of another. Again, if you don't have one of those particular things that you buy where you slide the matzah in, you can just use 3 napkins, and one on top of the other with the 3 layers. Why the 3 matzahs? Well, some people say it represents the 3 types of Jews: Kohens, Levis, and Israels. There might be some other ideas there as well. In general, we normally have 2 matzahs or 2 challahs at the table for Shabbos and for Yom Tov. This time we have 3. Okay, so you've said your Kiddush, holding the cup. You've said your Havdalah. You've drunk your first cup, leaning to the left. Now comes over to the next section, which is called Urchatz, Kadesh Urchatz, which is normally washing the hands. I find that the homes that I've been to, it's normally just the head of the household who washes his hands at this stage. It could be everyone. There's a difference of traditions. Why are we washing our hands at the beginning of the meal where we're only going to eat maybe 15 minutes later, maybe an hour later, maybe 3 hours later? Only after the telling of the story are we going to eat our meal. We normally wash our hands just before we eat. Why are we washing now? One of the answers is to get the child to ask, why are you washing your hands, Dad? Right now, we're not eating. Good question, son. Stay awake for a little bit and I'll tell you the answer, just to get the child to start asking questions. And it might mean, there might be some other reason why we wash our hands. It's not so clear. Then we come to the next section, which is karpas. Karpas is normally parsley. I know that in Russia, in areas where it might have been still very, very cold and there wasn't any green yet in the ground, so they used potato or something else, which was more viable. It could really be any particular vegetable, and you're dipping it in salt water. The reason why parsley was chosen in particular as the preferred version of karpas is because when you dip it in salt water and you shake it off, because the parsley is so small, the leaves are so small, it literally breaks the water into little droplets. And those droplets represent the tears of the Jewish people as slaves. So that's why the custom became parsley, which could use any other vegetable as well. And, we say the blessing over the parsley, and two other reasons why I saw we use parsley is parsley represents spring, and it is the springtime. That's from the Torah, that Passover has to happen in spring. And also parsley is it's a very small, easy to grow, cheap vegetable. And it's also to remember our humble beginnings as slaves at the beginning of the meal. And that's, right in the beginning of the Seder, we're eating the parsley. It's the first thing that we're eating. So that kind of makes sense. After the parsley, yachatz. Yachatz is breaking the middle matzah into 2, or one of the matzahs into 2, and you hide one of the pieces for the end of the meal called the afikoman. And again, why you're doing this is also to get the kids to look forward to the afikoman, which means dessert, at the end of the meal. Okay, so that's the breaking of the matzah, and you hide the matzah, and all the children. I know that there are different traditions. Some traditions have it that the children hide the matzah and the parents go looking. I know that I was always raised in a home that the parents hide the matzah and the children go looking. But whichever way it is, there's different traditions about that. But the whole idea is to try to keep the kids awake until the end of the meal. Now we come to the major section, which is Magid, telling the story of coming out of Egypt. This is where the author of the Haggadah, or the editor, went, had free reign, and he brought what some people from the Talmud said, and he brought what other people said, and he got them all together. I know when I was in yeshiva, my rabbi told me he believed that whoever the editor was, there were 4 major different opinions of what we're trying to do on the Magid section of the Haggadah. This was from Rabbi Blank, may he be well, in Jerusalem. So he said that One opinion is that we're telling the story of physical slavery to physical freedom. And that's, that's just a literal reading of the Torah, which is talking about physicality. I know that you'll meet some people who will say physical freedom is nothing, because you can go to the Bahamas and you can still feel a slave to your work and to your wife's expectations of you, or your husband's expectations of you, or your children's expectations of you. And you need a vacation from a vacation. So if you go along those lines of thinking, that would be the second opinion in the Talmud. It's either Rav or Shmuel. We're not sure exactly which one said what, but the second opinion would say it's not enough to talk about physical slavery. You have to talk about spiritual slavery and spiritual freedom. And that's why the Haggadah also mentions in the beginning we were idolaters, but then we got taken to Israel and got given the Torah. So those are two different Haggadahs just there, one focusing on the physical, one focusing on the spiritual. Those are already two. The third opinion is about Rabbi Gamliel, about it's not about this airy-fairy idea of feeling free. It's tachlis, hands-on. What do you feel? What are the commandments of the day? That's what Passover is of. Do whatever the commandments are. That's what you should do. So that's the Seder plate. That's when you lift up the matzah. That's when you lift up the maror. That's when you lift up the bone, etc., etc. So that's a third, so to speak, Haggadah, talking about the commandments of the day. And the last one is the Nirtzah. It's all the singing, all the Hallel that we do. That person says you start off very sad, but you end off very, very happy. It's not so much a philosophical idea of freedom. It's not so much an action-oriented idea of freedom. It is an emotional state that you need to reach. And that's why the meal itself has Hallel on either side of the meal, as if to say the meal itself is part of the praising and the emotion that you're trying to, get and convey to everybody at the table. So the Maggid that's what the Maggid section is, the main section. Now, if you wanted to make that very short, if you either are not in the mood, or you've got young children, or for whatever reason, you're tired, you're not feeling well, you don't want to go through 50 pages of 4 different people's Haggadahs. So what are the major things that people do? So they start off with Manishtana. Again, I'm leaving a few things, like Halach Manyan, there's a few things. It's like, I'm summarizing, 50 pages, but definitely the 4 Manishtana, just one word on Manishtana. Why is this night different from all other nights? Because on all other nights we eat bread or chametz, but on this night we eat matzah. And there's 4 different questions like that. The question is asked, why do you have to ask those questions if you already know the answers to those questions? Wouldn't it have been smarter to ask different questions every year that you don't know the answer to? But why are we asking the same questions every year? Okay, so a 6-year-old, the first time he learns the questions, he doesn't know the answers. But the next year, he does know the answers, and he's still the youngest at the table. So why is he singing the same questions every year? And I know that in English, when you say something like, you go to the Himalayas, or even you go to Cape Town, you see Table Mountain, and you go, how high, or how tall is, how amazing, or how tall is Table Mountain? Now, someone could understand that as you're asking, how many meters tall is it? And that is with a question mark, but it could be with an exclamation mark. And you're saying, how amazing, or how extraordinary is that mountain? Or how high is that mountain? Wow. And it's not really a question. And some authorities understand the Manishtana as more a proclamation than a question. You're proclaiming that this night is really different to other nights because this is the night that you're focusing on coming out of Egypt. It's not so much asking questions that you don't know the answer, because you do know the answer. It's more about that feeling. So that's, changes a little bit of the intention of when you sing that Manishtana. If you're singing it to yourself and it's not a child, you're actually proclaiming the significance of the night right in the beginning, as opposed to, asking questions that you already know the answer. Okay, so that's maybe one thing. The 4 sons is an education, it's an education on education. It's very much according to King Solomon's educate the child according to his way idea. And yes, there are people today, children, who are stubborn and who do ask questions like, what is this nonsense that you're doing? Oh, really? If you don't wear a mask, you think you're going to be safe from COVID? Oh, it's rubbish. The things come through your nose and da, 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 da. Even today with the pandemic, you can see that the people who are the rebels, who are stubborn, and I'm not trying to say that, people are bad people. Some people are bad people sometimes, but most of us are good people most of the time. But it all depends on our mood and how we are at that stage of life. And you teach the children according to what they're asking. So if you've got very young children, make it fun. If you've got older teenagers, make it a little bit more intellectual, make it more meaningful. A good idea for parents is to actually think about what are children going through in the slavery that they're going through, peer pressure, social pressures. I spoke to a psychologist the other day from Neisner who's doing like a whole presentation. She's trying to, develop a whole thing of how to deal with social media and the slavery that happens to children on social media, all the bullying, all the expectations, all the being left out of parties. I don't even know all that stuff that goes on, but I know that that's a whole world. And yes, children are enslaved in their own ways. Try to think of how they're enslaved and make the Seder relevant to them. So that's the 4 sons. Then there is, I think Michelle's here, I'm not sure, but I have someone who sometimes comes to these lectures who always says there's a 5th son, and that's the son of the Holocaust, who didn't even make it to the table. And I like that idea, so the children who didn't even make it. Thank you, Michelle. And I always remember that, and I always quote it at every Seder that I go to. And I'd like to expand that, Michelle. It's not just the child who died in the Holocaust, which I think is wonderful to think of them at the Seder as well, but it's just in general, the child who's not there. The child who just rejected the family, who just said, I'm going on my own. And there's more and more of those children than ever before who just feel that they want to rebel against the world. And yeah, we feel pity and we want them at the table as well. Okay, so that is the 4 sons. Then we have Dayenu. Dayenu is a weird song. It's a song about if God had taken out of Egypt, but not given us the Torah, not given us food, not given us Israel, not taken us across the sea, it would have been enough. Really, it would have been enough? No, it would not have been enough. We would have got killed by the Egyptians. We would have been living in the desert as nomads. It would not have been great. But the idea is that every stage of the Exodus is worthy of some praise. And I think that the moral of that to me in life is that, yes, just like a surfer, there's going to be waves. There's going to be ups and there's going to be down. There's going to be getting dunked. There's going to be hit by your board. There's going to be, arguing with the surfer next door who took your wave. There's going to be those moments. But all of those moments overall are all stepping stones of gratitude to really try and appreciate what you're trying to do in your life. And that's maybe the Dayenu message. Obviously, the plagues, there's lots to talk about with the plagues, especially with children. Why did Moses not do the first 3 and why did Aaron do the last 7? There's a few questions that you can mention there. And we, we put our finger in the red wine and we take a little drop out on the 10 plagues. And then we have the Seder plate, which, again, talking about the Seder plates at the end of the Magid, which is lifting up the Seder plate and showing all those things. Okay, I'm going to go quickly because we're only like halfway and I realized we only got 10 more minutes. Okay, we wash our hands for the matzah at the end of the Magid. And we drink our 2nd cup of wine before we wash our hands. So now we've already done 2 cups of wine. We wash our hands. This is everybody. We eat the matzah. It's a different blessing. We eat our matzah leaning, and we should eat at least a sizable portion to, remember, not just like a nibble. We should at least eat a little bit. And then we have the maror, which we don't lean, but it's bitter. And again, the maror, we don't take a little tiny piece. We should eat at least enough, like a mouthful or half a mouthful. And then we go into the Hillel sandwich, which we mix the charoset with the maror and the matzah, just like Hillel did when the Paschal lamb was around. We don't have the Paschal lamb, so we substitute for the Paschal lamb the charoset. And we do all three mitzvahs together, theoretically, if the charoset was a Paschal lamb. Then we have the meal. Ashkenazi custom is to start off with an egg and salt water and then go into whatever you want to eat. There's no particular thing. After that, we come to eating of the afikoman, which is the last thing that we eat at the end of the meal. And, also there's various reasons why we eat the afikoman at the end. Some people say you should eat the afikoman by a certain period in the night, like maybe by midnight or by 1 a.m. And then you come to the benching. So you bench grace after meals. It's very similar to the regular Shabbat benching, except there's one or two different things. And then at the end, you drink your third cup of wine leaning to the left. After the benching, we come to Hallel, finishing off Hallel. Now, I mentioned before, and I'm just going to reiterate and maybe expand for a minute. Hallel is the classic form of prayer that you say on every festival, which is very joyous. If you go to a synagogue on a day like Rosh Chodesh, when you say Hallel, or on one of the festivals, almost every song in Hallel is a song sung together in a community. So they're very famous songs, and I know many, many tunes of almost every song in Hallel. It's a very beautiful thing that King David wrote. It's the only time that you break up Hallel. Normally, you read Hallel in one shot. Here, you start Hallel before the meal, and you end Hallel after the meal. What's the significance in that? It's the only time that you break Hallel in the whole year. I was told by one of my rabbis in New York that the reason why you break it is to show you that the meal itself is Hallel. It's as if you're doing one long Hallel while you're eating. For this reason, if you're super duper mystical, the mystics don't talk during the meal. They say that it's part of Hallel, and they will literally go from the Seder into eating the matzah without talking, into eating the maror without talking, into eating the whole meal without talking. They get rid of the whole social thing because they're trying to, elevate their souls or whatever they're trying to do to feel as free as possible, because they say it's all part of a Hallel prayer. It's like as if the eating is a prayer. I don't think that that's what 99% of Jews do. 99% of Jews do. They eat as families on Passover. There's kids around, there's adults, there's grandparents, there's all those generations, and they're enjoying themselves. And that's what you're meant to do on Passover. So you don't have to feel bad for talking or for enjoying the meal. But I do want to relate that, yes, the eating is a form of prayer that you're doing on Passover. Not only that, but the Paschal lamb was eaten as a family. So when you're eating as a family, it's almost in line with what the Torah had envisioned us doing on Passover. And it's a very, very happy time. So it's probably like inappropriate to talk about the stock market or talk about things which are, not really relevant to the day. It should be an enlightening discussion, or at least not a very negative discussion, because it is a form of prayer. Okay, so now you've drank the third cup. We do now do the cup of Elijah the prophet. We always bring Elijah into our major events. We bring him into our events. Thank you. We bring him into our events at a bris, and the Tanakh says Elijah didn't really die. So we assume that he's around somewhere and that he brings blessing to our table. And that's what we bring the Elijah the cup for. One interesting thing is that there's 4 expressions of God taking us out of Egypt in the Torah. But there's one expression of God wanting to bring us to Israel. So some people say that the cup of Elijah represents not the coming out of slavery, but the eventual going to Israel. And we don't really drink to that cup because on Passover, it's really about coming out of Egypt more than it is about going to Israel. But we do represent it with a cup for Elijah at the stage of, it's called the 5th cup. And then finally, we end off the night with Nirza, L'Shana Haba Yerushalayim, next year in Jerusalem. Some people sing, many, many different songs for the kids. Chad Gadya, Echad Mi Yodeya, Adiru. There's lots of different songs that people sing. But that's all about, trying to reiterate that fourth level of Passover, according to the fourth author of the Haggadah, which is you got to end off b'shvach. You got to end off with praise. You have to reach that elation. That's the whole point of what we're trying to do. So, at this stage, you've already drank 4 cups of wine. So, you should be a little bit happy and enjoying and singing, and you laugh at the children. And there's like nice Yiddish songs, and there's all different types of songs that people can sing to try and just be labadic, which would just be, loving life. I know that some people find it awkward to sing just in general aloud. Other people find it awkward to sing in front of other people, but I'm quoting Rabbi Nachman on this one. Sing, just sing. Sing to your family, sing in your own private space. No one really cares on Passover. It's already a bit of a long night, and just enjoy yourself with everybody. That's what Passover is about. To end off, because we won't have a lecture on Passover, we'll give everyone a break. But the rest of Passover, so obviously there is a second night of Passover, of the Seder, which is a tradition to have. The first night is obviously more important because it's the Torah commandments, but we do a second night Seder as well if you live outside of Israel. And then the rest of Passover, you're allowed to work during Chol HaMoed, even though obviously it's better to take a rest and enjoy the festival. It's hard to really relate what the feeling of Passover is in a country other than Israel. Only in Israel, when the whole country is on vacation, can you get a feeling of what Passover was meant to be. It was a long 8-day celebration of God, and people come to Jerusalem, try at least once during the week, etc., etc. You don't need to eat matzah the whole of Passover, even though the Vilna Gaon says that every bite that you eat is considered its own commandment that you're fulfilling. But the only real commandment from the Torah is to eat matzah on the first night, and the rabbis extended that to the second night of the Seder. So, everyone can choose how much matzah they want to eat, but we obviously are not allowed to eat chametz. Lastly, I'll add, and I left this for last, there is a custom by some to sell their chametz if they're not going to rid their houses of chametz. And that should be done by Friday morning. So I know that they'll sell it, like in Cape Town, they're selling the chametz at 10:30 a.m. You can do it at Chabad online, or, that's the easiest place to do it. I personally think it's better to eat all your chametz before Passover and do a proper sprinkling. And that's what we try to do. But, some people, they've got whiskeys and they've got this and that. So if you are going to sell your chametz, you should try to do that online before 10:30 a.m. on Friday. I'm wishing everyone a Chag Sameach. Thank you for being here in the Liberation series. And I hope that you can work out how to liberate yourself just that little bit more this particular Passover, because that's what it's all about. Slow, incremental steps. You've got your whole life to feel free, but it's got to start somewhere. Good luck, everyone, and I'll see you when we are coming out of Egypt. Look left and right. You'll hear me with my croaky voice singing. Hugs up. God bless you.